Title: The Unmarked Grave. Year: 175 million. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. The battlefields of Laurent had grown silent. No more did the clash of swords echo through the cliffs. No more did smoke rise over the crimson hills. But the silence was not peace, it was a forgetting. A world eager to move forward, leaving its heroes buried beneath soil that knew no names. Even Hale remembered. He returned to Laurent alone, bearing nothing but a rusted shovel and a journal stitched together from battle orders and love letters. He was once a captain. Now he was just a man who had promised too many dying comrades they wouldn't be forgotten. The Republic offered him medals. He traded them for rope and ink. Chapter 2. Each day, Levan wandered the plains, locating makeshift graves marked by weathered stones or broken blades. He wrote their names when he could remember them. When he couldn't, he wrote their stories, their final jokes, the way they held their weapons, the names they whispered in their sleep. No one paid him. Some called him mad, but others came quietly at first. A blacksmith's daughter searching for her brother, a field medic turned painter, a boy who only knew his father by a half-burnt letter. Together, they began to build something, not a monument of marble, but of meaning, a grove of memory, each tree marked with a name, or a phrase, or a song lyric only one person would understand. Chapter 3. Levan died under the oldest tree, ink-stained hands clasping a journal with more names than pages. The Republic never officially recognized the grove, but people came. They left boots, flowers, stories, and one day, a soldier turned scribe, etched a plaque into the rootstone where Levan lay. The river never asks if it has enough to keep flowing. Beneath it, in smaller script, sometimes the greatest sacrifice is being the one who remembers. Title: The Lion's Whisper. Year: 174,679,486.7. Year: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. They said the gilded tyrant had no eyes, that his mask was fused to his face, lined with gold not as ornament, but as a prison for the things he'd seen, and chosen not to stop, a ruler of a shining city, gleaming with glass towers and polished streets, built on what had once been a forest full of breath and bones. When people cried, he answered with silence. When they vanished, he commissioned fountains. Then the lion's whisper began, a whisper that tore the night. Chapter 2. It came from below the cisterns, the tiles, the gold veins of the city. Old roots murmured at first, then birds stopped singing. Then murals began to peel themselves off walls and reform into warnings. One phrase echoed through the decay: when the world blinds you, go blind until you see from within. The whisper grew teeth. Citizens began dreaming of ancient kings, of forests judging their footsteps, of lions with no voice who ruled by listening. They awoke shaking not from terror, but from clarity. The tyrant remained above, but the soil began to reject him. Chapter 3. The whisper manifested fully one night. During the eclipse, no army came, just every child in the city refusing to speak, every elder refusing to walk the avenues, every tree refusing to sway with the wind. It was hard not through violence, but through absence. And then, from the quiet, a lion's form emerged from the roots of the old plaza. It leaned close to the tyrant, who stood alone on his balcony, eyes wide beneath the mask. It spoke no words, it only was, and in that presence the city changed, not by force, by remembrance. The gilded tyrant was never seen again. Only his mask, cracked open, laid at the base of the lion's statue where the forest grew anew. Title: The Softest Power. Year: 174,358,974.3. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. The village of Lorphin always smelled of honey and quiet rain, even when the sky burned above other lands. It was the kind of place where people whispered hello and left bread on each other's doorsteps without a name. Here, time moved by garden growth and tea temperature. The last thorn of summer was not born with that name. She earned it the year she refused to harden. As a child, she cried during sunrises, not out of sadness, but because she felt the weight of becoming. Others urged her to toughen, to shed her softness like unripe fruit. But she learned to speak with bees, to mourn in public, to apologize without shame, and she kept her softness. Now grown, she sat in the old orchard at the edge of town, pruning the last blooming branch before fall set in. Behind her, someone approached, silent but heavy with presence. The cloaked reminder. She never saw his face, only felt what he carried, a mirror wrapped in mist, and the story no one had dared complete. He sat beside her. "You haven't changed," he said. "No," she replied, smiling. "I just stopped apologizing." He opened the mirror, and in its reflection, she saw it every time she had softened when the world expected stone. Chapter 2. The mirror shimmered not with clarity, but contradiction. In its surface danced the moments she had once feared were weakness. The day she forgave someone who never apologized. The night she held a crying stranger's hand until dawn. The letter she never sent, because kindness had done more than truth could. The cloaked reminder spoke without speaking. His silence was invitation. "Your softness is not weakness," she murmured, tears lining her voice. "It's the womb of your power." The orchard wind rustled in agreement. That evening she walked through Lartfin with the mirror on her back like a burden and a banner. Children ran beside her. Elders watched with reverent eyes. At the river bank she placed the mirror in the current. It floated, then melted into light. That night every home in Lartfin dreamed the same dream, a field where their softest moments bloomed into strength. Chapter 3. With the seasons shifting, the last thorn of summer gathered the village in the square. She held no staff, wore no crown, only a garland made by children and a heart uncloaked. "I will not lead you," she said, "but I will remind you." She recited stories, not of victories, but of gentle truths. How one man left flowers at a grave he'd once spat on. How a girl fed a dying fox and learned to listen. How her own grandmother used depressed sadness into dough until it baked into something sweet. A cloaked reminder stood at the edge of the crowd. Unmoving, unseen, yet every eye knew him. He was not her shadow. He was the part of every heart that feared soft things would break, and now saw they could build. As autumn came, Lartfin flourished not by storm, but stillness. And the last thorn of summer stayed not as hero, but as hearth. Not to change the world, but to warm it back open. Title: The Sleepless Midwife. Year: 174,038,461.1. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The world had grown quiet, too quiet. In the mountain city of Arkenfall, where once laughter and thunder from the forge mingled in the air, only whispers moved now. The sleepless midwife walked the streets at night, her lantern dim but unwavering. She did not age. She did not tire. She had delivered every soul in the city, or so the legend claimed. They said she remembered every cry. She walked not for ceremony, but for remembrance, and she had begun walking faster. Chapter 2. Across the borderlands, strife spread as flags turned to weapons and names to barriers. Old alliances were shattered by newer fears. The people stopped seeing each other in the faces across the markets and gates. But in Arkenfall, the midwife did not yield. She stitched blankets for those whose accents were strange. She cooked stews from recipes long banned. She healed wounds even when no thanks followed. Her message was simple: if they bleed, they are your kin. Children followed her in silence, watching, learning. When asked, "Why don't you ever rest?" she smiled, "Because the world hasn't yet remembered itself." Chapter 3. A war was coming. She felt it in her bones, the tension in the rain. The waystone cracked underfoot. The city council planned to raise walls. The midwife raised beds. She opened her home to the foreign-born, to the ones blamed when crops failed, and when the march of soldiers thundered nearby. It wasn't spears that met them. It was every citizen of Arkenfall standing arm in arm, offering food, song, and memory. No line drawn, no sword unsheathed. The war stopped at the gates, not in fear, but in shame, and the midwife slept for the first time in 50 years. Title: The Misguided Feast. Year: 173,717,948.6. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Pinion's Hollow was notorious for two things: bizarre festivals and maps that never led to the same place twice. It was said the streets had moods and the bridges held grudges. At the center of its confusion sat the one who eats them out. He was not a monster, though some called him one. He wore a waistcoat lined with crumbs and kept a silver fork for ceremonial consumption of poorly drawn directions. His belly was full of misguidance, his mind ironically quite sharp. This year the town was preparing for the great cooperative caper, a civic tradition in which every citizen had to work together to achieve a simple task, like moving a goat across a fountain without waking the mayor's pet raven. No one had ever succeeded. But this year something changed. The collector of regrets arrived. She wheeled a cart full of jars, each glowing faintly with embarrassment. Public proposals, karaoke disasters, mild betrayals, all preserved with poetic labels. "I've come to barter," she said, meeting the map eater's gaze. "With regrets." He sniffed. "With reminders," she replied, "that the egg is proof you are still reaching for what matters." He burped out the subway blueprint and nodded. It had begun. Chapter 2. The townsfolk gathered in chaos. One half argued about the boat's trajectory. The other debated whether ravens could legally be woken before brunch. The map eater lounged on a bench, chewing the last page of a pirate's diary. "This will never work," he sighed. The collector of regrets placed a jar in his lap labeled the time you let them try without helping. He winced and stood. Right then, everyone shut up and listened to the idiot who reads paper. The town stilled. He pointed to a child. "You ride the goat. You'll baker. You distract the raven with seed scones." To the mayor, "You pretend to sleep." The town hesitated, then obeyed, and for the first time in 47 years, the goat crossed the fountain undetected. They erupted in cheers. The map eater sat down, sweating. "My God, we did it." The collector handed him another jar. "First time you felt useful." Chapter 3. The celebration spiraled into song. Badly harmonized and entirely sincere, the town square was lit by lanterns filled with map fragments the map eater no longer needed. "We don't have to be right," the collector declared. "Just reachable." People danced, traded regrets for laughter. One elderly woman swapped her memory of a botched love letter for the map eater's sketch of an honest apology. In the middle of the square, the goat was knighted. The raven snored. The mayor wept. Later, as the stars blinked overhead like uncertain spectators, a map eater turned to the collector. "You think this'll last?" She shrugged. "Cooperation isn't a state. It's a practice, like heating maps or naming mistakes." He chuckled and held up a blank page. Together they labeled it "The Day We Almost Didn't Try," and pinned it to the fountain, because in Pinion's Hollow, nothing ever stayed the same, but some things finally started making sense. Title: The Threshold Keeper. Here, 173,397,435.5. Year: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. On the rim of the last habitable sector, known as Segment 47B, stood a structure untouched by time or corrosion. Its arches pulsed with faint bioluminescence, and within it lived the one called the Threshold Keeper. She was neither commander nor citizen, but something older, chosen, rooted. She could see patterns in solar flares, predict breaches in the unity fields, and speak the language of quantum roots. The last time the stars realigned, a stranger arrived, one with her eyes. He bore no name, only questions. Chapter 2. "You've seen me before," he whispered. "No, but I've dreamed your questions." He walked like one who doubted every surface. She moved like one who was the surface. Together they accessed the vaults beneath the structure where failed potential was archived. The records of 1,000 lives never lived, each one a variation of the Keeper. And the stranger. "You were me in a failed timeline," he said. "Weren't you?" She nodded. "Or you were me in one yet to arrive." The rhythm between them, call and echo. Fear and curiosity was war. It was ballet. And their steps began sinking. Chapter 3. The Unity. The ray pulsed violently. Something was coming, a paradox, storm, the kind that unthreaded civilizations. To seal it, one must cross the threshold, losing the self that doubts, and becoming the one who decides. The stranger hesitated. She extended her hand. "Walk with me. Let your uncertainty lead you, not halt you." He did. As they stepped through, 2 timelines collapsed, only one remained. Neither was the original, but it was theirs, and somewhere beyond what could be measured. The cosmos nodded. Title: The Strength That Waited. Year: 173,076,922.9. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. In the broken heart of the morning expanse, where dust whispered louder than wind and stars dared not shine too long, the ruins of Alderhall still hummed with stories. It was there that the Shadow Whisperer was last seen. She did not ride in with a banner, nor did she carve her name into stone. She arrived in silence and shadow, carrying only an oath and the scars of every plan that failed but left her standing. The hollow tree guardian waited for her beneath the oldest branch of the grove of echoes, a tree that had not bloomed in 1,000 years. He was bark and bone, ancient and unmoving, yet eyes alike with memory. "You came," he said, his voice like wind bending through reeds. "I didn't stop coming," she replied. "The road just forgot I was on it." She placed her hand on the tree. Nothing happened. Not yet. Adversity does not forge strength. It reveals the strength already waiting. They would try again. Chapter 2. For 7 days and 7 colder nights, the Shadow Whisperer and the hollow tree guardian gathered what remained. Fragments of runes from shattered obelisks. Dreams buried beneath the laughter of tyrants. The remnants of ancient oaths traded away too cheaply. Each night she whispered stories into the soul of people who failed gloriously, of paths walked alone. The stars followed into the storm. The guardian listened. He did not interrupt. On the 8th morning, A single leaf grew. "Is it enough?" she asked. "No," he said, "but it answers." Their enemies came next, not in armies, but in doubt. A council of kings declared her too broken. A former ally cursed her name. Even the wind carried whispers. She failed before. She will fail again. Still, she returned to the grove. Still, she placed her hand on the bark. Still, she waited. Chapter 3. On the 13th dawn, the tree bloomed in silence. Not with flowers, but with mirrors. Tiny silver leaves that reflected the faces of those who had given up. Faces that blinked. Faces that breathed. From across the realm, those who had once stood at her side felt the pull, not of glory, of calling. They came, not to follow, but to stand beside her, before the final challenge. A shadow whisper carved the names of her failures into the trunk. Each one lit the ground around her. Each one. A flare for the forgotten. "You were never meant to carry this alone," said the hollow tree guardian. She smiled. "I didn't carry it. I kept it warm." Together they stepped into the court of final reckonings, where the last lie ruled like a king. They did not fight. They persisted, and the lie unraveled itself. Later, under the blooming tree, a new whisper spread. Strength does not shout. It stays. Title: The Ash Walker. Year: 172,756,409.8. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. In the city of Glaives Hollow, the sky was always gray. Not from weather, but from the soot that lingered from the old incinerators machines that had once burned not only waste, but dreams, defiance, and hope. A city built on ashes was a city trained to forget. Farah didn't forget. Courier by day and shadow informer by night, she moved through alleys where the air tasted like regret, carrying not just parcels, but coded messages stitched into thread and inked beneath bottle labels. Her call sign was whispered by rebels. Ashwalker, not because she feared fire, but because she knew how to walk through what remained. Chapter 2. The ruling council of Glaives Hollow had long claimed equality had already been achieved, that there were no more castes, that all were free. But Shara saw the checkpoints, the closed doors, the way some voices never reached the broadcast towers. She used those towers. In one sweeping move, she overrode every channel and told the story of her people, of children forced into mining zones, of families erased from records, of healers denied medicine licenses. She did not cry. She did not plead. She told the truth. Then she vanished into smoke. Chapter 3. The city didn't erupt overnight, but things cracked. Doors opened. Questions were asked. Seeds of policy reform were planted in backrooms and among former rivals, and as shifts took root, people left small ash marks on buildings in quiet solidarity. Years later, when Glaives Hollow held its first open election, they named the Central Forum after someone whose name was never confirmed, but whose presence was etched into every voice that rose, hard above its gate. When certainty falls away, possibility awakens, and beneath it, the Ashwalker walked through ruin so others could rise in light. Title: The Mirror Beneath the Thorn. Year: 172,435,897.2. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan, and Rise of the Zodiac, Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Calbridge sat between two rivers, one of forgetting, the other of truth. Most citizens dipped daily into the former and carefully avoided the latter, but not the thorn-eyed pilgrim. She arrived barefoot, her cloak patched with regrets, her eyes thorn-crowned not in pain but in clarity. Wherever she looked, illusions faltered. Her name had long been erased voluntarily so that she might better carry others' truths without branding them as her own. Her first stop was the clinic of comfortable lies, where pain was smoothed over and wounds were kissed shut without ever being cleaned. Inside, the healer whose wounds tended to the townsfolk with practiced avoidance. He was a master of half-truths and soft medicine, and for a price he could make any ache seem like a dream. "You've come to shame me," he said as she entered. "No," replied the pilgrim. "I've come to remind you." He reached for his scalpel. Truth cuts deeper than any blade. She nodded. "Exactly." And for the first time in years, the healing began with a scream. Chapter 2. They walked the town together, a spectacle of thorns and silence. People parted, unsure whether to fear or follow. Rumors swirled. She could see your worst memory. You could name your deepest denial. At the bridge of divergence, the crossing between forgetting and truth, they paused. The healer hesitated. "I've spent my life softening others' falls, not guiding their climbs." The pilgrim touched his arm. "Every decision mirrors who you are and hints at who you might yet become." He stepped onto the bridge. They crossed together. On the far side, they entered the house of unspoken apologies, a building whose walls echoed with every word left unsaid. There, they found a child who hadn't spoken in months. The healer knelt. "I told your mother she would be fine. She wasn't." He held the child's hand. "She wasn't forgotten either." The child began to cry, and then to hum. Chapter 3. With each confession, Calvers changed. Doors once locked to memory creaked open. Fields long left fallow bloomed again, fed by tears instead of rain. The pilgrim never raised her voice. She simply looked, and people found it harder to lie to themselves. In the town square, the healer erected a new clinic. It bore no signs, only mirrors. Those who entered were asked one question. What lie are you tired of telling? Answers came slowly, then faster. A merchant. That I don't miss him. A teacher. That I'm fine being ignored. A mayor. That I lead because I should. The pilgrim placed the thorn from her crown into the clinic's threshold. A symbol. Truth will wound, but wounds breathe. On the day she left, the rivers ran clear. Children dared to wait in both. And behind her, the healer wound smiled, not because he no longer hurt, but because now he healed by facing what hurt most. Idol. The thorn. Lips color. Year. 172,115,003. 184.2. Era, Early Awakening. Author, Jeremy Levan. And Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The Citadel of Grinth claimed neutrality. Its archives stretched the length of rivers. Its laws were etched in copper and bone, and its scholars wore thorns on their lips, the symbolic vow never to use knowledge as a weapon. Yet in its silence, cruelty had grown. Beneath its golden domes, injustice was footnoted instead of confronted. Gale was born in the citadel, but raised beyond its gates, among the fringe communities who were studied but never understood. He returned with a gift for memory, a mind sharpened by listening, and a mouth sealed by the vowel. He broke it with his first lecture, Chapter 2. Gale's lecture was not academic, it was testimonial. He spoke of the sick who weren't studied, the poor who weren't counted, the songs that weren't preserved because they didn't come with citations. The thorns cracked from his lips as he spoke, and the halls trembled. The council labeled him a radical. But students listened. Some wept, some followed. They began collecting oral traditions, building bridges where categories once stood. Still, Kale was expelled. He left not in shame, but in purpose, and he took with him 3 things. A scroll of the old laws, a cup made from melted silence tokens, and a vow remade. Chapter 3. Years later, a new library stood in the Divide district, built by donations, tended by those once ignored. They called it the Archive of Unheard Things. And there, in the center of its rotunda, stood a statue. Kale had bowed, thorn stem broken, lips parted in speech. Beneath his feet, carved in old Granthian runes, the very thing you resist may be the one that delivers you. And beneath it, empathy is not softness. It is the most precise blade of all. Title, the name that endured. Year, 171,007. 194,008. 171.5. Era, Early Awakening. Author, Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series 2025. Chapter 1. The town of Sultron was carved from the bones of the sea. Each building carried the scent of storms, and every step crunched over the stories of those who had washed ashore, stayed, and built something anyway. Here, kindness was currency and memory, a ghost too stubborn to drift. The name buried in salt lived on the edge of town in a shack with no door. He kept a basin of sea, brine in the center of his floor, and whispered names into it. Each dawn names of people no one else remembered. His hands were weathered, but his eyes carried the glow of someone who had chosen, again and again, not to close them. He rarely spoke to strangers, until the masked midwife of the coming came. She arrived during low tide, veiled and silent, bearing with her a birthing cloth made from 1,000 patched prayers. You remember, she said. I do. And you endure. I must. They stared out toward the horizon. The world is coming for this place, she said. It will not ask permission. The man nodded. Then let it come. We have learned to rise. Chapter 2. The Tide brought refugees, children too young to name the storms they fled. Elders who carried grief, like wedding bands, and those in between who didn't know if they'd ever been whole. Sultron took them in, not with speeches, with action. The name buried in salt taught them how to mend nets, not to fish, but to connect. Everything broken, he said, can bind something stronger. The masked midwife trained the willing in resilience, not just survival, but growth through reflection. She whispered truths during midnight walks, each one planting roots beneath the listener's skin. You don't need to know your name, she'd say. You need to know your shape. One girl, orphaned and nearly mute, began drawing symbols in salt each morning, new ones, always. When asked what they meant, she simply said, I'm practicing. Practicing what? Being real. The townspeople smiled. Chapter 3. When the sea rose higher than it had in decades, they were ready, not with walls, but with welcome. Boats became bridges, sheds became sanctuaries, and silence became secret. After the storm passed, the town was smaller but brighter. The name buried in salt stood beside his basin, whispering again, only now, Others whispered with him. The masked midwife prepared to leave. "You've planted enough," she told him. He shook his head. "It wasn't me." She smiled beneath her veil. "Kindness etches itself into the soul, sometimes seen, always felt." She turned, stepping into a fog that no longer frightened anyone. In the years to come, Sultran became legend not for what it endured, but how it embraced. Every child learned that resilience wasn't forged in grand battles, but in patient hands and persistent hope. And the basin in the shack, it overflowed, not with tears, with names, and every one of them still shimmered with salt and kindness. Title: The Fallen Hero Redeemed. Year: 171,474,358.6. Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. Before he was the Lantern Keeper, Rylos was known by another name. One whispered in victory, cursed in defeat. He had led 100 campaigns across the Divide, stitched nations together with steel and fire. But when the dust accords were broken, and the blood of allies stained his command seal, Rylos vanished. They called him traitor, coward, oast. He called himself unfinished. Chapter 2. Years passed, and Rylos returned, not in armor, but in robes, to a village he had once evacuated with too much force and too little care. There he carried a single lantern to every doorstep, asking only for stories. Stories of their elders, of songs lost, of meals shared, of festivals cancelled because of fear. He listened. He did not defend himself. He lit the lanterns one by one, and with each flame he rekindled memory not of war, but of resilience. Chapter 3. Word spread. Other veterans came, hoping to bury their ghosts in firelight. Artists arrived, painting murals that braved together the faces of strangers and former enemies alike. Children carved their dreams into lanterns of pressed bark and old tin. No statue of Rylos was ever made, but in every city of the Accord's reach, a lantern festival was held at the season's close, and in each opening ceremony, the same words were spoken: "You can change the world, but first you must change yourself." And on the final lantern to rise into the dusk, a ash burns bright not to blind us, but the light, what we must become. Title: The Ashes That Taught. Year: Era: Early Awakening. Author: Jeremy Levan and Rise of the Zodiac Series, 2025. Chapter 1. The city of Femir was a marvel of stone and circuitry, powered not by coal or sun, but by sacrifice. At the heart of its towers flickered the ember spire, a flame that never spread and never dimmed. No one quite knew who tended it, until the day the Keeper of Ashes stepped forward. He wore soot-like armor and spoke only when it mattered, which was rarely. His touch could reignite dead coals or snuff them without effort. He claimed no name, only duty, and he was tired. Then came the blind poet. She arrived during a blackout, her cane tapping verses against the cobblestone, eyes shrouded, voice soft. She found her way to the ember spire and sat. "You carry too much," she told him. He said nothing. "Let me help," she offered. "I don't need help." "Then let me listen." And so began their pact. You cannot become until you are first undone. Chapter 2. Together they walked the wounded district zones, scorched by failed experiments or reckless power. The Keeper extinguished runaway sparks. The poet recited stories that stitched hope into ash. They found a boy trapped beneath a collapsed forge. The Keeper lifted molten beams with bare hands. The poet held the boy's fear at bay with whispered rhythm. "Your hero is," the boy said. "No," the Keeper grunted. "Maybe," the poet smiled. But as the days passed, the Keeper began to change. He stopped walking alone. He started listening. He asked the names of those he saved, and one night, while tending a broken conduit, he said aloud, "I used to dream." The poet, startled, reached for his hand. "And what did you dream?" "That I'd matter without always burning." She whispered, "You already do." Chapter 3. Trouble came not as villain or army, but silence. The ember spire began to dim. Old systems failed. Citizens panicked, and the Keeper fell to his knees before the flame. "I've given everything," he gasped. The poet knelt beside him. "You haven't given yourself." He looked at her, confused, and understood. He stepped into the spire, not to burn. His voice, long forgotten, carried every name he'd saved, every hand he'd held. The flame responded not with hunger, but harmony. The poet joined him. Together they became not fuel, but melody. When the light returned, it was gentler, warmer, and the people of Femir changed. They no longer relied on heroes. They became them. The Keeper of Ashes still walked the city, but now he smiled more, and the blind poet, she no longer needed sight. She saw everything through the growth she helped shape, because in helping others rise, they too had risen, undone, then were made.